The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Creator of the universe, I ask your blessings on all those gathered here today. Inspire them to work fairly and wisely, cooperatively and responsibly, so that peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may abide forever in our midst. May these legislators and others present here safeguard the ideals and the institutions that are the pride and hope of our state and nation. May the state of Minnesota, under your providence and their leadership, be an influence for good throughout the land, banishing hatred and bigotry, uniting all people in peace and freedom, and helping us all to fulfill the vision of your prophet Amos, who said, "Vaigal kamayim mishpat utzedakah kenachal etan." Let justice well up like water, righteousness like an unfailing stream. And let us say, Amen.
The chaplain for today is Dr. Marian Broida from Gustavus Adolphus in St. Peter, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will take the roll.
His button, Matt. I pushed your button when Matt Bliss texted me, push my button. So I said, yes. That's why, I asked you, do you want me to push your button? You're like that out lower intestines.
Members, please answer the quorum call. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 93rd Session, 2023, 28th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, March 1st, 2023.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business is on your desk and online. If there's no objection, we will take action and the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading House File number 1178.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 1335.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 1349.
Second reading.
And second reading House File number 1627.
Second reading. Introduction of House files. The following House files have been offered for introduction. Today, the Chief Clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 2338 through 2554.
First reading House files 2338 through 2554. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendments to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File number 28, an act relating to elections. The message is signed Thomas S. Boddard, Secretary of the Senate. Frazier moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File number 28 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is my motion. There is no change in the bill. The bills are identical, but there was a technical issue that requires the reviser to send them back to us, and we have to do a concurrence. So it's like deja vu all over again, but I'm hoping we can get this done quickly. Thank you.
Discussion on the Frazier motion that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 28. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File number 28, as amended by the Senate.
Third reading as amended by the Senate. Any discussion to the bill? The member from Brown? Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Not going to talk about the bill so much this afternoon, but about the fact that we are pushing things through so quickly and with such vigor that we're making mistakes. We need to slow this process down, do our work well, and avoid repeats like this in the future. It's not necessary. Careful work is not always speedy work. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any further discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 ayes and 58 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendments, the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File number 4, an act relating to transportation. The message is signed Thomas S. Boddard, Secretary of the Senate. Gomez moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File number 4 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Gomez, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion. House File 4 is driver's license for all. There were 3 relatively minor amendments that were added in the Senate, and that's the reason for the concurrence today. I'll just roll through them quickly, if that's okay. First, in an amendment to 171.06 was amended to add that applicants for driver's license are required to sign the application under perjury. That's current law. This amendment explicitly lists non-compliant driver's licenses and real ID among the examples in the statute. So it just added those two items to existing law. Second is also 171.06. Federal law establishes general parameters for commercial driver's licenses, including immigration eligibility requirements. So this sentence simply affirms that if federal law establishes citizenship or immigration status requirements for CDLs, then this section wouldn't allow the issuance of these driver's licenses in violation of that. So it's really just pointing us to federal law around commercial driver's licenses. Finally, there was a 171.1205. There was this line that said a state agency a state agency and a political subdivision must not use the possession of non-compliant driver's licenses or identification cards as evidence of a person's citizenship or as the primary basis for investigation, detention, or arrest. And this amendment changes the and to an or, so it's now a state agency or a political subdivision. That's pretty technical, likely would have been updated in the reviser's bill and was a recommendation by nonpartisan staff. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion on the Gomez motion to concur in the Senate amendments. The member from Waseca, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And if the author would yield for just a second for one question, I'd appreciate that.
Representative Gomez will yield. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. And the way the Senate did this, it was very difficult coming back to really understand exactly what was happening. And I think you clarified it for me, but I wanted to just make sure that when they took away the requirement to attest under penalty of perjury for driver's licenses, it looks like that was entered back in on the first page of this amendment. So in your opinion, this now clarifies that indeed all forms of application for driver's license would be violating perjury if you falsified information, including addresses. Is that correct?
Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Petersburg, I have to heartily agree with you that they did confusing things to this bill in the Senate. I apologize on their behalf to us all. Yes, that's my understanding, is that basically subdivision 1 states that all of the information contained in the application for a driver's license is, you're signing it under penalty of perjury if you lie. And this simply adds those two examples of a non-compliant driver's license and a real ID to what exists in statute, which is provisional license and enhanced driver's license. It does not substantively change any of the perjury penalties associated with filing an application for a driver's license.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you so much for the clarification, Madam Speaker and Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the Gomez motion to concur in the Senate amendments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House Bill number 4, as amended by the Senate.
Third reading as amended by the Senate. Discussion to the bill. The member from Ramsey, Representative Perez-Vega.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think we're all done playing catch with this from our Senate to the House, and it's ready to get HF4 to the hands of our governor and sign this for the community that we've seen celebrated from the House to the Senate in this past month. And I'm excited to say, Gomez, let's give it to the Gov. Thank you.
Any further discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 60 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announced by the Speaker, a message from the Senate has been received requesting concurrence of the House to amendments adopted by the Senate to the following House File number 121.
Reports from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Long from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, March 6, 2023, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills. House File numbers 669 and 670.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 444. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 444, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to human services modifying the Homeless Youth Act, second engrossment.
Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor into the retiring room or outside the chamber. The member from Clay, Representative Keeler, to explain your bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. First, I want to start by thanking you, Madam Speaker. Last term, you created a division that was dedicated to addressing the idea of preventing homelessness in Minnesota. And when we have leaders that deeply understand the need for that conversation, we make movements and we make changes. So what the Pathway Home Act is a work from that establishment. With that, I also want to acknowledge the staff that have worked diligently for years on bringing this together. Molly Peterson and Sean Herring, if you don't know them, they work diligently behind the scenes. They work extra hours, and they really do the work with the community so that we know that we're putting good things together for good people. So I appreciate you and the extended hours times that we have put into this. I also really want to acknowledge one of my very best friends, and companion in this work specifically. Chair Gomez, as the chair of Preventing Homelessness, you allowed us to have really honest, open, and humbling conversations around addressing homelessness. And understanding that you as a Minneapolis member and me as a Greater Minnesota member, that there is a true blend in how we serve Minnesota together around this issue. So what this bill is, and what House File 444 is really a collaboration of many ideas on how we actively start the effort to address ending homelessness. We've seen many data points and we hear all of the stories, but I want to just highlight that there has been data, and it continues to be shown, that our BIPOC populations are significantly more likely to experience homelessness, with the Native American population being the highest. I'm going to walk through the bill quickly. I know we have some amendments, and we will go from there. First, we're investing in capital in shelter. 40% of that is designed to go to Greater Minnesota because we know, and we heard today earlier in committee, that individuals who end up in Ramsey or Hennepin County, anywhere from 30, 40%, even up to 50%, actually come from Greater Minnesota. And we know that the fastest way out of homelessness is around community that supports you and uplifts you. We have emergency services program. We can only do so much if we build the brick and mortar. We have to have the wraparound services. We talked today about how we have programs across this nation that are doing amazing work around wraparound services and having case managers available. There's an element of transitional housing because the number one question is, if we put people in shelter, how are we going to actually give them homes? And the transitional housing opportunity provides some of the skill set that we need to grow the knowledge to be homeowners and to make our time in homelessness short and brief. The biggest part of this that is really empowering is the investment and the increase in the Homeless Youth Act. We have kids that are dying on our streets on a regular basis across Minnesota. And the investment in that is the future in our economy and in our state. We also use a system that's the HMIS system, which is our systems database that tells us how well we're doing, what systems we're utilizing, how they're effective, and how we can connect other supports for the individuals that need the supports collectively. With that, members, we can move to amendments.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
New Brindley moves to amend House File Number 444, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A9.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Keeler. This amendment, I think, is a friendly amendment, and I think that's how it is received. As we've served on the Homelessness Committee together for the last 2 years and now on Human Services together, and we've dug into these issues to an extent that I don't know that any of us were really prepared for. And we have a very different understanding. One of the things we learned is how much we didn't know about homelessness in the state. And there are a lot of different grant programs involved in the homelessness space. And that's what this bill is about as well. And I had a concern on the third page regarding the language that allows 100% of project capital to come from this grant money. Typically, that's an unusual provision. Typically, when we pass grant funding from the state level, from the general fund, we require folks to have some skin in the game, and we require there to be some matching grants. We didn't get entirely to matching grants on this, but we've at least made progress. So this amendment would at least make it so that grantees who have some skin in the game with just 10% of the project costs would be given priority under this language, and I would ask for your support of the amendment.
There's an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Keeler moves to amend the New Brindley amendment to House File Number 444, the second engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A10.
Representative Keeler, to your amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative New Brindley. It is a friendly amendment, and I agree to that. The only adjustment that we made is that this would be for new construction. The only reason that we did that is because some of this grant money could be used for the example that we give is they need to update maybe HVAC systems or boiler systems. And this would just be making sure that those type of investments wouldn't also need the 10% match. I agree that when we have community investments and we partner together, we braid what can be long-term better in general. So I would encourage members to vote yes.
Discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, thank you, Representative Keeler, for working with me. We don't see entirely eye to eye on the amendment to the amendment. I get that, but I do appreciate your willingness to have conversations and at least work with me and hear me out and do so really respectfully. So I appreciate that. So while my concern is that the amendment to the amendment really is limiting, and I think it effectively negates. I just think that the vast majority of this grant money is going to go into those existing programs or facilities. And so it probably is going to sort of negate the underlying amendment. So I won't be supporting it, but I completely understand the spirit in which it is given, and I appreciate the conversation. And so I will be voting no on the amendment to the amendment, but I understand where it's coming from. Thanks, Madam Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. We are on the underlying New Brindley amendment. Any further discussion? Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While I didn't love the amendment to the amendment, it still makes the underlying bill just a little bit better. And frankly, if that's what we can do here today, I'm happy to do it. So I would encourage folks to support the amendment.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
New Brindley moves to amend House File Number 444, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A7.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're just playing some musical chairs back here. So the A7 amendment is a little bit different. And again, we've spent a lot of time on the Preventing Homelessness Committee. But a frustration that my colleagues and I share, particularly on our side of the aisle, is that often we weren't focused on preventing homelessness. We were focused on dealing with homelessness once it was already occurring. And so this amendment would put some of the money for the building, that $150 million, it would make building of workforce housing an allowable use. I don't think it's news to any of us in this chamber that we have a major problem with workforce housing. This is affordable housing for folks who are not high income, who need access to housing that currently does not exist. And so this amendment would make that an allowable use. And I want to be specific. The reason I'm doing this is so that we can try to get to the root causes of homelessness. We have a lot of areas across the state, and I know that includes a lot of our rural areas, where we've got a chicken and the egg scenario, right? We've got businesses who are willing to expand or build in our areas, but they can't because they don't have workforce. And they can't bring in workforce because they don't have workforce housing. And there are a whole lot of folks that are affected by homelessness who would be in much better shape if they could just get into a place where they have workforce housing, affordable housing, so that they can actually hold down employment and be in a better position overall. So that really is the intent of this amendment, and I would ask Madam Speaker for a roll call.
Representative New Brindley requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the New Brindley amendment. Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, I would encourage a no vote on the amendment, not because workforce housing isn't a priority, it very much is. I agree with much of what Representative New Brindley said. We do have a big crisis all across our state, in particular in greater Minnesota in workforce housing. It's an issue that we've been talking about a lot in our housing committee. And I think you can expect that the housing priorities moving forward will include workforce housing because, as you mentioned, it is very important. This really isn't the right forum. This amendment kind of turns DHS into a housing agency. It's not really the correct form in this bill, but it is a good priority. And I would hope to have some bipartisanship when we bring forward significant investments in this vein later on this session. But I'd encourage a no vote.
Any further discussion on the amendment? The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, Representative New Brindley, thank you for bringing this forward. Workforce housing is a huge issue across greater Minnesota. I came here almost actually a decade ago. We had workforce housing issues then. I had a company that's been looking for, at that time they were looking for 2 welders. They're now looking for 12 welders. When they find somebody that can actually perform the job, there's no place for them to move into to live. Because you can't buy a home right away. It takes months to actually purchase a home. We need to get workforce housing up in greater Minnesota so our business businesses in our communities can survive. Inflation has been a big issue as well, making it even harder to get employees. So thank you, Representative New Brindley, for this amendment. I encourage members to vote for it because it is desperately needed across this state.
Any further discussion on the New Brindley amendment? Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Johnson and Representative Howard. I appreciate at least the acknowledgement that really this is a significant issue. I would just point out that as this amendment would apply to subdivision 2, and right now the appropriation of $150 million, it's a lot of money. It can be used for the acquisition of property, site preparation, including demolition, pre-design, design, construction, renovation, furnishing, and equipping of emergency shelter facilities. Here's the problem, folks. We don't need more emergency shelter facilities. We need to get people housed. We need to, our goal here should be to end homelessness, not to give them a space to be while they are homeless. We heard a bill earlier today that included hotel vouchers that can cover this kind of thing. We made extensive use of that during the pandemic. There are other things that we can do, but when we're talking about permanent structures, permanent building, we need to be looking to end homelessness. And emergency shelters are not ending homelessness. Housing is ending homelessness. And particularly that workforce housing is ending homelessness. That needs to be our goal. I will tell you, we heard a bill earlier today in committee about Ramsey County, who frankly, and I've kind of been singing their praises for several years, because they've actually done a really phenomenal job throughout the pandemic and since the pandemic of really identifying how to move the homeless community in Ramsey County from homelessness to stability. And they've done a really phenomenal job of figuring out where to funnel folks to make sure that they are getting the services that they need. And they had a proposal earlier today that I think does a lot to actually attempt to end homelessness. And it also had some new programs, a pilot program that frankly I've been talking to them about for a couple of years that I think has real promise to do so. And this is the kind of stuff we have to be thinking about. We have to be thinking about how we are actually going to end homelessness. And as much as emergency shelter space is important and it's critical in the short term, I'm frustrated by that focus. Our focus needs to be long-term, stable housing, and we're just not getting there. We're just not getting there. And again, there are additional benefits that it's not just providing that long-term stable housing, but it's also providing that housing that our employers need to be able to expand and grow and offer jobs in our communities. It's really critical, and I just hope people see this for what it is. This is an opportunity to actually end homelessness, bring stabilization, not to just deal with the acute problem. And I would ask for a yes vote.
The member from Clay, Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative New Brindley. I just want to make sure that we know what this bill, the intention and the understanding of this is shelters save lives. Housing ends homelessness. We understand that. That is why this is laying the foundation to be the pathway that other stones are added to for us to become a state that has minimal homelessness. But the Minnesota Coalition for Homelessness actually provided some documentations for us with projects around the entire state that are shelter projects that need to be done from border to border. And there's 87 projects around the state, totaling more than what we're requesting. And so I just want members to understand that there is a need for shelter and that shelter saves lives. I would say that it's really nice to know, and I will be honest, Representative New Brindley and I have conversations on a regular basis about we understand that this is an issue, and we understand that there's more conversations to be had. And I do believe that this is a conversation that can be added down the path. But at this point, members, I would say vote no. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Baker moves to amend House Bill number 444. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A8.
The member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, again, I want to bring the attention to the important need of this emergency housing and the emergency shelter that we need. And I've also, along with Representative New Brindley, have worked with Representative Keeler about this important issue about behavioral health and substance use disorder. And I know she is also passionate about this like I am. What I really want to bring forward to our members is adding the piece of this, Section 4, the emergency shelter and the $150 million, to also include our mental health providers that are providing this needed care for people on an emergency level. Also, our substance use disorder treatment providers really could use a piece of this if they are ready for this at the right time. Last Friday, Representative Cagle and I were involved in an ORAC meeting. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago now, up in Moller, Minnesota. And I was able to take a look at a Recovering Hope facility up there for moms having babies while they are struggling through recovery and trying to get clean. And this amazing place called Recovering Hope up in Mora is growing. They need more beds. They need more facility room for this important service. So, members, I really hope that we can kind of encourage the author and let this happen. I did not get a chance to visit with Representative Keeler about this. I do intend to reach over to the senator who's leading it over there, Senator Dibble, and I want to make sure this is also on that radar as well. So, Madam Speaker, before I forget, I do want to do a roll call on this to try to see if we can move this A8, please.
Representative Baker requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Baker.
And thank you. So, Representative Keeler, I hope that you see this as a tremendously friendly amendment that we can offer those folks that are reeling in mental health, reeling with substance use disorder, because they absolutely have to have shelter along with this. This is a good idea to get this emergency shelter out there. I hope that we can see that this would be a friendly, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would encourage a no vote on this, and I want to thank Representative Baker for bringing this up. This issue is, yes, we need to be building out the behavioral health world. There needs to be work on it. And I also know that in the shelter world, it's extremely important, because so often when we have people who are homeless, they're dealing with issues around substance use or mental health. And the most effective way that they can be treated is you've got a place for them to stay. And that's why we need to build out the shelter program. Too often, many of the folks right now are in camps. And the good thing is that for the shelter, we already have a shelter-linked mental health program that's out there. So having more shelter space gives more opportunities for that program to be able to continue. And I know where your heart is on this, Representative Baker. I know that we need to do work in that area, and would look forward to doing some of that in other areas as we go forward. So I would encourage you to bring that back in the future. But otherwise, right now, I'd ask for a no vote. Thank you.
Further discussion on the Baker amendment. Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Baker. I do appreciate the ongoing conversations we have around harm reduction and making sure our communities stay safe. Again, one of the things I didn't say and I was going to say in third reading is that the Pathway Home Act is vetted conversations that we had out of our Preventing Homelessness Committee. The conversations that you and I have and will continue to have on this work, I'm absolutely committed to, because I do know that we sit at all kinds of tables together, whether it's human services, education, public safety, where we all have components of preventing homelessness, that even though I'm encouraging members to vote no on this, that I want to be very clear that that does not mean that our work in harm reduction in communities is not intended to go moving forward. Thank you.
Discussion on the Baker Amendment. Any further discussion? Representative Baker. The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House Law Number 444, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to the bill. The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Keeler, thank you so much for your work on this bill. When the Speaker put together the Children and Families Committee this year, it included the portions of the Children and Families Division within DHS, which includes the Office of Economic Opportunity and homelessness issues. And I'll admit I did not have that much background in that area. But what I know from a past hearing shared with Chair Gomez and then Chair Hausman, we had a tripartite joint hearing, Preventing Homelessness, Housing, and then Early Childhood Committee, about the impact of housing instability on brain development and on kids. And it is not good. I think it's the case, my Minneapolis colleagues can correct me if this is not true, but I think 1 out of 5 kids in the Minneapolis public schools experiences homelessness or housing instability. That has a major, major impact in those years and for the rest of life. And if we can get kids on a different trajectory when they're experiencing that trauma, and that, I believe, an adverse childhood experience and impact throughout the rest of life, that life is benefited, but all the rest of us are as well. So there could not be a more important investment that we could make. And the fact that we're doing this at this point in session and stepping out and saying that we're going to prioritize this area is so important. I'm grateful to have it be that Chair Gomez and then Vice Chair Keeler put this together and have kept on pushing now into this session as well. So we're able to take steps together to get every single child in this state off to a great start. And this is an important component of that. I urge a green vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Noor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you to Representative Keeler for really championing this bill. Members, homelessness is deadly. Recently, one of my constituents, Adnan, lost his life because he was homeless. I don't know if you've read the recent reports that indicate that a young person who is in age 20 has life expectancy like someone who's almost at 80 years old if you're homeless. Members, I think we have got the resources to house every unsheltered Minnesotan. I know we can do this, but often we don't prioritize those who need the most. For many of us who walk through our district, our city, and when we see individuals who are sleeping in encampments, along the streets, in the parks, in many places, we often take for granted. All of us have got a place to go. and I have a place to sleep and have that privacy, a place to call home. And yet, many of our residents don't get that chance to call a place a home. This is a pathway to home. It's not ending homelessness, it's reducing homelessness. With many of the individuals who are homeless suffer from diseases of despair and disconnection. They experience mental health issues. They experience substance use disorder. And quite frankly, some of the families, because of our economic system is rigged against them, they don't have income to pay their rent. More than 50% of Minnesotans pay more than 50% of their income just for rent. And they don't have enough savings just to pay for their regular rent and utilities, just to get by every single day. And especially when we talk about young kids, children, young children who are homeless. It's shame on us that we don't think about them. As a father of 4 young children, I can't imagine being homeless. It's not easy to send your kid to school knowing that they don't have a home to come back to. I think we can do better. This bill is just a starting point. Members, homelessness should never be helplessness. Homelessness should never be helplessness. Homelessness should never be hopelessness. We can lift everyone who needs our help today. We can support our constituents. If you haven't come to see those individuals who are in encampment in our districts, who not only come from our own area, but they come from everywhere, every corner of the state, because they're looking for a place and space to call home, and yet we haven't given them that option. This bill is an attempt to reduce and prevent homelessness. If you believe in the right thing to do, this is the right bill to support today. Members, I ask you to vote green and send a strong message that we are ready as a state, not only to reduce homelessness, in the long run, we will be able to end homelessness. Thank you, Madam Speaker and members.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Keeler, for bringing this bill forward and moving it early in session. I just want to speak a little bit to the needs in Greater Minnesota and in my community. We talk about a housing continuum of making sure we can move people from experiencing homelessness to wherever the end of that housing journey for them might be, home ownership or in supportive housing or wherever it might be. I also think about the people that aren't even quite on that continuum yet. In our community last year, there are 4 shelter beds for youth 18 to 24 who are experiencing homelessness. So what does it mean to be a youth in Greater Minnesota experiencing homelessness? It means you're finding place wherever you can. And we opened up a warming center in our community to accommodate for the lack of shelter, where technically you're not supposed to sleep. It's supposed to be where you are there, the lights are on all the time, you could come and warm up on a cold night. Last year, or this last year, we had 54 youth that visited that place because they had nowhere to go. We only had 4 shelter beds. And that means they're sitting in chairs, pretending like they're not sleeping, but trying to get a little rest. And often we know this is for our GLBTQ community members, youth of color. This is often where they find themselves. And it's no place for youth to be, it's no place for anybody to be. We need to make sure we have shelter capacity so that we can move people along that journey. And in my community, I worked at a homeless shelter, and we know on nights where we had to open up beyond capacity, I hope the firefighters aren't listening, but we would do it. And what it meant is we would do whatever it takes to make sure that we would have space in that shelter. And that meant thin mattresses that most of us wouldn't even sleep on camping, would be on these floors, and they would be everywhere. And we would put people with high needs and high risk next to people that they couldn't even sleep because they just have to stay awake for their own safety, but needed somewhere to be. So when we talk about shelter needs in greater Minnesota, we know that this is prevalent. In northeast Minnesota, we have one shelter outside of the Duluth area to meet these needs that would right now be shovel ready and be able to expand and fill what it has. So this isn't just a regional hub center. This isn't just a Minneapolis-St. Paul. This is all over our state that youth and adults and families are experiencing homelessness. And so this would have that immediate ability to have the capital ready so that we could not only have the shelter, but we could have the supports people need as they make their journey, hopefully not staying long, but we need to make sure that we have the space for them now, because a warming center is no place for an 18-year-old to be when experiencing homelessness. I think about one story that sticks with me. When I was at Chum, even though I didn't do direct services, my office was in the shelter, and we had these teeny little rooms that were about like the size of these desks here for families. When our family shelter overflowed to capacity, we'd have these teeny little rooms where we'd put families. I remember one day, families were supposed to be gone during the day. We cleaned and took care of the shelter during the day, and I could hear these little voices from the other side of my wall. And I could hear these little voices chattering over there, and I thought, I don't think anyone's supposed to be in there. So I went and knocked on the door, and I looked in. It's a family of 4. There's mom, a dad, the 2 kids, on their floor in the mattress, just hoping no one would find them there, because they really have nowhere else to go. We don't have space. We don't have places to go. Even our overflow shelters are overflowing. And we don't need that, and we have the resources to do better. And so the capital available to here would make sure a family like that had some dignified place to stay as they were experiencing this hopefully short incident of homelessness and moving them on that continuum. But we need to think about it as a continuum, and we need to fund this part of that continuum so that we can also fund all of the other places to support families as they journey out of homelessness as well. So thank you, Representative Keeler, and I encourage a green vote on this.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Keeler, for bringing this bill forward. I'm really excited to see the provisions in here, particularly the provisions around the Homeless Youth Act. This is something that is critical to help continue to build out our homeless youth system, because the system needs out there for our youth. The youth have much different needs than adults, and we need to have the system ready for them. When you take a look at the statistics out there, over half of homeless adults experienced homelessness first time when they are at 24 or younger. And so it's really important that we have the funding out there to address the needs for the youth in our communities. Some of the things that we have to remember is that it was not that long ago we did not have the Homeless Youth Act out there. Back in 2007, it did not exist, and many of the youth shelters at that time struggled. I worked at one of those shelters at that time, and it was on the verge of where we might not make it, and that meant that would close and there would no longer be the beds there. Our shelter had gone from 20 beds down to 15, trying to make it work. During that time, some of the toughest things I had to deal with is realizing we could not provide some of the supports that the youth needed because the funds were not there. It was the difference between being able to pay the staff there or closing down. That's where we were. It was a tough time. And as a result, mental health services, being able to provide those supports, some of the case management support so they could be successful, were not as available as we would like to. Eventually, the Homeless Youth Act came into being, and that really helped. However, the first time it was set up was only set up at $1 million. Well, it helped get a number of organizations going, helped ours along that I was part of. The following turn, it went down to only $100,000, and some of the organizations were not able to survive that drop. And so we lost some capacity in the system. And that's why I really appreciate, Representative Keeler, what you've done in this bill here is making sure that the dollars are not one-time dollars for services, but ongoing dollars, because it's so hard for nonprofits to be able to continue to provide the services going forward when there's a cliff coming down the road and they're not permanent dollars. Having lived through that, it's really tough when you see shelter beds go away for the most vulnerable youth in our communities. Some of the things that we really have to keep in mind is that so often that the people that we are working for and that we're supporting out there, the youth, have been many times thrown out of their families. Many of them are in a situation where they don't have family to go to, and so the youth shelters are set up out there to help provide the support services, the case management services that they need, helping them get connected with housing going forward. These are the services that allow them to get their education, help them continue on in their jobs, and when they are able to become stabilized like that, they're able to then securely find housing going forward, where they're able to get into a transitional living program, or more importantly, into stable housing where they've got the rent support so that they can be successful down the road. That's why the homeless youth component is so important, and that is very important that when we find youth out there, that we've got the ongoing dollars for it. And this is just as important. When we take a look at doing funding elsewhere, when we take a look at doing funding education, we don't say one-time dollars to fund our education. We provide the ongoing dollars. When we're providing long-term care, we say we're going to provide dollars not just for the next 2 years, but we're going to allow them to pay for those salaries going forward. And that's why I really like the bill that we have here, because it provides for those dollars going forward and treats our homeless youth the same as we would anyone else who's vulnerable in our society. So please vote green.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. And I would like to thank Representative Keeler for bringing this bill. There are few people here in this body that are more dedicated to helping those who need help more than Representative Keeler. So it's a real honor to me to support this bill, and I'm grateful that you are bringing it. We all know that we have a problem that we're trying to solve here. We heard earlier through the amendments and through the discussion, there are many ways that we could solve this problem, and you know, the problem is that we have 13,000 homeless youth in the state of Minnesota. That's 13,000 too many. That's obviously true. We know we need to do something about that. But I just want to say, you know, we need to recognize that 73% of those homeless youth are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. 25% of them are members of the LGBTQ plus community. Our communities are hurting, our communities are feeling helpless and hopeless, and they really need bills like this to help lead them home. This is a pathway home. It's the perfect title for a bill, as Sharon Norris said. This is not going to end this problem, but it is a pathway home. I'm sorry. And we do need to end homelessness, and there are many things that we can do to do that. One way that we could do that is to have families stop rejecting their children. That's a very direct path to homelessness. Individuals end up on the streets, they don't have somewhere to go, and they end up with very few choices. And to say we don't need more shelters is very hard to hear, because we do, but we also need more permanent options. I'm sorry, I'm getting away from myself. I'm getting more emotional than I thought I would. This is a necessary, essential piece of legislation. Everybody should be supporting this. This is good work. We are here to help people. There's no way this bill is not helping people. This is what we're here to do. This is why you come to do this work, to help people. So please help people and support this bill.
The member from Dakota, Representative Ryer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Keeler. I rise tonight in support of House File 444, the Pathway Home Act. This bill includes funding for emergency services programs, a program that's one of the backbones of the emergency shelter system, ensuring that the physical shelter spaces we create have the resources they need to help the person in shelter move on with their life. ESP was created by the 1997 Minnesota legislature, and its purpose then and now is to initiate, maintain, or expand programs providing emergency shelter and services to people experiencing homelessness. Funds can be used for operation, administrative, and supportive services costs of shelter. I'd like to share with you what this means in the life of a person receiving these services. When I was in my 20s, I was in a shelter for a month with my infant son, escaping from domestic abuse. This gave us a safe and secure roof over our head. We also had emotional support from staff to recover from trauma, help getting vouchers for housing. Staff brought expertise about obtaining food assistance, health care coverage, and provided legal support and expertise for advocacy for those who needed it. They took care of my baby while I took care of myself and did what needed to be done. I regained the strength to get out of bed in the morning. And so much more, all delivered in a place that was homey and well-maintained. I would not be where I am without those 30 days and the support they gave me. As part of the Preventing Homelessness Committee, led by Chair Gomez, Vice Chair Keeler, and lead New Brindley, last biennium, we were privileged to hear many such stories, similar in many ways, but every one marked by each person's individual history, culture, and circumstances. We heard from Jason, who talked about services with the shelters he needed, helped him achieve sobriety, and become a mentor and support to others. We heard from Pamela from the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa about the services her community needs, like case management, referral assistance to other programs, and support for mental health and substance abuse issues, all provided in a way that's grounded in the traditional and cultural ways of the community. And Chris from Catholic Charities talked about how stable funding and investment helps build a shelter system that's a place where people want to work, where they can afford to work, and where then staff can spend more time and build trust with the people they're serving. That's the real beauty of the Emergency Services Grant Program, that it's a flexible program, adaptable to the needs of each community that uses it, no matter where they are in the state or the specific population they serve. It's a program that can create a system that's low barrier, culturally responsive, abundant in services, and emotionally supportive. These services are the lifeline that people in shelter need and that elevate the shelter experience into a step towards stability. I'm confident that all of us have the same goal of a shelter system that helps move people forward. We talk a great deal about our budget, forecast budget surplus, now more than $17 billion. When I look at this figure, I don't see surplus. I see underinvestment. Funding for this bill is just one way we can help bring our investment in our state and our people into alignment with our values. I hope you'll agree that passing the Pathway Home Act is one of the more important steps we can take. Please vote green.
The member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've not spent much time in housing and don't really want to speak about a whole lot, but all the conversation here makes me think about something that I saw happen quite a while ago. In fact, this young lady was probably older than my oldest daughter, so we're talking 25 years ago. Mom and Dad didn't come home one night. She was a sophomore in high school. And friends discovered she was home without a parents. She had a little brother. She made sure the little brother got to school. Nobody was aware of it. This is a small town. And a lot of things don't happen in small towns without somebody figuring it out soon. Well, as the school discovered what was going on, she even had a job. She worked at a local restaurant. We all loved her. It was great to be able to tip her because we knew she was working hard. We knew the family. I don't ever know what happened to Mom and Dad, and it doesn't really matter. But when the school discovered this high school student was trying to take care of her brother, fund her own food and care, social services stepped in. We didn't have any of housing or anything like that. We did have the care and share. But what happened was a classmate offered this young lady to come home with her. Social services said, you know what, we'll keep you with your brother connected, but your little brother will go somewhere else where he can get some help too and care. And what strikes me as important, we can give housing to kids all day long, And some will do well, some will not. But what I saw in this young lady was the support system she also needed. And she got it. The family took her in. She still worked her job. They helped her. She ended up being Miss Crookston. Very talented young lady. I don't know where she is today. I actually think she moved over to Representative Olson's district. I think she went to college at UMD and believe she's in that area. But she was successful. And I think the key to all of this, as we're caring for people to have homeless shelters, is the fact that the support system is important. Yes, a warm bed, a house over your roof over your head is important, but food is important. Caring about that person and what's going on in their life is important. And I really think that connection, that human connection, is so very important to these young people. Somewhere something has failed. Maybe their whole family is struggling. But when we do these types of things, which I realize we want them to stay healthy and warm, I really think that it is important to think about other ways that we can help people. And I really appreciated how this family, it's not the only time this family has taken somebody in and helped them, and it's a wonderful project. But it wasn't a project. This young lady became part of their family. They keep in contact with her. And I just, in this case, mom and dad failed. And just think we really need to think about what we're doing. It's wonderful, like I said, to provide a shelter, but there's so much more going on here. And if we want them to be successful, I think we have to look at that too. How do we help people to be successful? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I really find that there's something perverse about having a $17 billion surplus while there's Minnesotans out in the cold who do not have a home. While we've seen family homelessness increase by more than 250% in the last year. Members, 20,000 evictions took place last year, numbers higher than pre-pandemic levels. And so this is a crisis. This is necessary to create shelters, to create places for Minnesotans when they feel like they don't have hope, when they feel like there is not a path forward. And I just want us to try to put ourselves in the shoes of folks that find themselves in this place. And what this bill does is says for those Minnesotans that you are strong, you are resilient, and that you have a path forward to succeed and to thrive. And it's why it's so important. It's why it will absolutely save lives. The other thing I wanted to say, members, is that our work isn't finished when we pass this bill. Yes, we absolutely need to provide this funding and do it now to provide shelter, but we can't create false choices for ourselves here. If we truly want to end homelessness and end children's homelessness in the state, which we absolutely can, it's an achievable goal, but it has to be yes and. We have to make sure that folks have the supports they need, but it means that we need to create rental assistance so families can stay stably housed. It means that we build more homes across the state. It means that we create pathways into home ownership. We need to see this as a path all the way from homelessness to home, a home that every single Minnesotan deserves. And the last thing I want to say is I have so much gratitude for Representative Keeler for being so dogged and making sure that not only that we pass this bill, but that we're here taking it up right now. And members, we need to pass this bill like yesterday. There has been a lot of conversation about the speed at which we're moving here. But I've been struck how much we talk about that in terms of kind of our under-the-dome legislative process. I'd hope that we would think about this in terms of what Minnesotans have over their heads. And every single Minnesotan deserves to have a home. They can't afford for us to wait. If we don't pass this bill and get this to the governor's desk and signed very soon, it's going to mean more Minnesotans are out homeless in the cold next winter. We cannot wait to act, and Representative Keeler has kept us pushing forward. each and every one of us have an opportunity to keep us pushing forward by voting yes, and we should see this through and get this bill to the governor's desk for a signature as soon as we absolutely can, because as Representative Keeler said, shelter saves lives, housing ends homelessness. We have our work cut out for us this session. I believe we can succeed, and today is such an important first step on that path. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Keeler, for bringing this really important bill to the floor. I want to take a moment to recognize the funding in this bill for transitional housing. I think a lot of folks, myself included, when I first started, before I was on Prevention of Homelessness Committee, I thought transitional housing was just an extra step that unsheltered people had to go through, and I really didn't understand its importance. But I actually carried the bill in that committee to fund transitional housing, and it was a great learning experience. That's what I love about being in the legislature, is it's an opportunity to learn about things that you don't otherwise know about. The reality is unsheltered individuals are experiencing an incredibly stressful time period in their lives. And when they're exiting homelessness, they need a period of stabilization before moving into permanent housing. We know that people who enter transitional housing after emergency shelter experience more positive housing outcomes than their peers who do not. And first of all, I think we need to acknowledge that just moving from an emergency shelter to transitional housing itself is a positive outcome. But beyond that, of those who go through transitional housing, 78% were either still in their housing program a year later or had exited to a permanent destination at the end of the reporting period. And that's compared to just 19% of the unsheltered individuals who don't go through transitional housing. So it's a stark difference, 19% versus 78%. And I am a data person, so I pulled some statistics. More than just a place to live, transitional housing provides wraparound services often to people who need it most, and it helps empower them to be thriving, fully functioning members of our society. Studies have shown that a participant's length and stay in transitional housing is the strongest predictor of positive outcomes. Families that spend more time in transitional housing programs had higher levels of education attainment at move-out and increased employment for a 12-month follow-up period. And finally, studies have indicated that participants who reside in programs longer experience increased housing stability and that children experience positive mental health outcomes. So in reality, this is much more than just an extra step between being unsheltered and being in permanent housing. It sets people up for success. Transitional housing results in increased employment, less substance abuse, and less contact with the criminal justice system. And for that reason, I am highly in support of House File 444, and I hope that you all can support it along with me. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I've been thinking, I think, over the last few days about the Preventing Homelessness Division, and so in the summer of 2020, well, I guess, we were in the middle of COVID, and Minneapolis police officers murdered George Floyd in my neighborhood, and there was a civil unrest, and there was a homelessness encampment. If you know South Minneapolis, there's a Target store right near the 3rd Precinct on Lake and Minnehaha. Representative Koznick knows what I'm talking about. So there was an encampment behind the Target. And during the public health emergency, we had received guidance from the CDC to not displace people living in encampments because there was the fear that that would, potentially spread COVID further among that population, which is medically fragile. So the encampment behind the Target had grown pretty large. And then the Target was on fire, and there was a terrible scene behind the Target, and people's belongings caught on fire. And there's it's an old railroad corridor that's now a bike path, and people took their things from that encampment behind the Target, and they moved down what we call the Greenway. and there was a hotel where people stayed for some time, where those people in unsheltered homelessness stayed for some time. During this time, of course, we were meeting every month. We had session every month. And in June of 2020 and July of 2020, as I recall, we were working a lot on police accountability measures as a response to what had happened in my community. And so during that time, when we were in session, and we were in long nights of session, the people who had been staying at the hotel, who'd previously been staying behind the Target, moved into my neighborhood park. So it's like a really big park. It's called Powderhorn Park. It's sort of the biggest park in my neighborhood. And there was this one night, and I heard about this, right? But we're in these kind of negotiations on police accountability. We're in session, and I heard about this encampment. And one night after session, it was 12:30 at night, and I went there just to see what was going on. And I had a constituent there, and I just remember this is one of those moments of doing this job where she was like, you know, she needed something from me. She needed me to do something. And I had to say to her, like, I have like 3 or 4 more days of these crazy long nights of session, and she had been there. She was a neighbor. She'd been there working a food tent, our community really came together to try to provide, to try to help support what had turned into several hundred people sleeping in our neighborhood park. It was completely unsustainable. It was kind of like a wild scene, you know? And I went there this night at 12:30, and my constituent was like, what can you do? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing about this? And I had to tell her I needed a few days, and I remember this look of fury and disappointment in her eyes, and I remember she just turned around and walked away from me. And when we finished our work here at the Capitol, I went back. I told her I was going to come back, and I told other people there that I would be back. And you know, at that time, I'd sent my family away because my neighborhood was burning, and I couldn't care for them and do the job that I needed to do here at that time. And so I ended up at that encampment night after night after night and day after day, and I ended up going there every day. And there would be daily meetings, often of county providers and nonprofit providers, and I would call, you know, the mayor and the Hennepin County Board, and I would call the governor, and I would be on Zoom at the homeless encampment, like, this is what's happening in my community. And there was just this like massive interjurisdictional finger-pointing thing that happened. And it was like some of the most frustrating times that I've had in this work, I think, was trying to figure out like who's responsible for what and like what in the world is going on in my neighborhood. And I think I don't know how many times I cried in caucus in the summer of 2020, but it was more than once, but this was one of them. I was so frustrated, and I remember looking at all of this. There's federal funding going to all of these things, and how is it possible that we have 250 people sleeping in my neighborhood park? Like, how is that possible? And so I don't have a background in homelessness. I'm not like Representative Olson, Representative Fisher, who have worked for years in these areas. But I was somebody who, this issue was thrust onto me because it was in my community. And because I was in this position of trying to deal with this, just the frustration of nobody wanting to take accountability. And that's why the Speaker, I believe, created the Preventing Homelessness Committee. Don't cry in caucus to get a committee created. Do not recommend. But you know, it was so many of the issues around homelessness, especially unsheltered homelessness, which accelerated during COVID, so many of the economic realities that undergird the reality of like us living in the richest country on the face of the earth, and there are still people sleeping outside in our parks, were laid bare during COVID. And so the timing of creating the Preventing Homelessness Division, I think, was the right time. It was the right time. And so I want to, this is how Representative Keeler started her remarks, but I want to say thank you to the speaker for recognizing, the human tragedy that this is and the human cost of allowing beloved members of our communities to fall off the edge. And so, I feel incredibly privileged to have chaired the Preventing Homelessness Division for 2 years. And, I think that you saw some of the cooperation that we were able to foster between, the two parties in that committee, and I'm deeply thankful for that, especially for the collaboration of Representative New Brindley, who was the lead on the committee, and who, I knew from the first conversation that we had, it was like that she had a heart for this work and a heart for the people who were impacted by this issue. And, we were able to do good work together. And, Molly Peterson and Sean Herring, our incredible staff, who worked with us in the Preventing Homelessness Division and have just never quit working and working and working and pushing this work. And so my gratitude to you. Their work will make a big difference in people's lives and already have. And we had the privilege of hearing from so many, it was during COVID, right? So we could hear from people all over the state. And that was something that was actually pretty special, I think, about that time was that we heard from service providers across the state who had just basically, in the previous few months, had completely remade the shelter system to deal with a airborne pathogen. Thank you. I'm like, what's the word I'm looking for? Because a lot of our emergency homelessness response system consists of congregate living. So you have people in like bunk beds in a gym. And then suddenly there's like this respiratory illness that we know nothing about. This is a medically fragile population. And so our service providers just moved mountains, and it was incredible that we didn't lose many, many people during that time. And that was because of those service providers and because of our state employees who managed to push out tens of millions of dollars that we got from the federal government to transform our homelessness response. And they're just like true heroes, and hearing their stories in our committee was incredibly moving. And of course, most poignantly for all of us, I'm sure, on that committee was that we got to hear from so many people who'd been personally impacted by homelessness, who had experienced unsheltered homelessness. We had, people who'd been homeless with their kids, and we heard from all these foster care, people who'd aged out of foster care, and who ended up in unsheltered homelessness. And we heard from, we had somebody Zoom in from an encampment eviction one day. We had so many people come before us and vulnerably share their stories and their personal experiences. And it was and we did a lot of work, and we put together this package that's similar to what's in front of us today. And as you can imagine, when Speaker Hortman called me on the phone, and I think it was November, and asked me if I would be the tax chair, I was shocked. And I was incredibly honored, and I think I was like, oh yeah, of course. And then I hung up the phone and I was like, oh my God, I didn't say anything to her about homelessness. And so I felt this there was kind of these weeks when I felt this like I had abdicated my responsibility, or I was like, well, how are we carrying this work forward? And so then to start session and have Representative Keeler, my sister, my vice chair, to step into this work and to carry it forward and to do so with such tenacity and care and diligence, because you can hear she's had conversations with so many people who wanted input on this. And the way that she does her work, where she centers the people and she shows up early and she stays late, is just such an inspiration to me. And so, Representative Keeler is finishing this piece of business on behalf of the Preventing Homelessness Committee, and we thank you for that. And I just want to also say, my gratitude to Chairs Newer and Fisher and Pinto, and to our caucus and to our leadership and to our partners in the Senate for continuing to carry this critical piece of our work forward. And I look forward to passing it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you so much, Representative Keeler, for bringing this absolutely important, crucial bill that will make such a difference in people's lives. And I just wanted to briefly mention and Representative Hollins, thank you for your wonderful talk about transitional housing, because there's a piece in this bill around that I think is so critically important. And I talked about this a lot in the Preventing Homelessness Committee over that last biennium, and I mentioned this in Ways and Means. I just want to share quickly with the body an example of what I think we are talking about and why it's so successful. It's called the Steve O'Neill Apartments in Duluth. And Steve O'Neill was a dear, dear friend of mine, really a mentor in life, as well as teaching me community organizing. And when he passed away, a group that he was involved with in Duluth called CHUM, which stands for Churches United in Ministry, was able to use a variety of state and local resources to build an incredibly successful transitional housing program in Duluth named after Steve, the Steve O'Neill Apartments. And so I just, on the 5th anniversary of the Steve O'Neill Apartments, which was dedicated in 2014, a TV station in Duluth ran a story. And I was struck by some of the voices they included in the story. For example, Sandy Pavola, who wrote, "It's helped my family grow in many different ways. Education, mental health. I feel like I've got a community, and it's really nice." And that's what these wraparound services do. And finally, from one of the staff people, Mary Lou Larson, who works for CHUM, simply said, folks are getting settled in, and they're improving their health. They're beginning to dream about what might be next. And so, members, this is one example of many where this bill will continue to make a difference in people's lives. Please support it, vote yes. Thank you, Representative Keeler, for bringing this to us.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. Again, we've spent a lot of time working on these issues together over the last couple of years, and so it won't come as any surprise to anyone that I have some concerns about what we're doing. But I want to be clear, it's not that I just don't want to spend money on homelessness. Just today in committee, I voted yes to spend kind of a lot of money on homelessness, because we had a really good proposal to do very specific work to end homelessness. So I certainly do not approach this as someone who doesn't think this needs investment. I think it does need investment. But this bill is frustrating to me. As I go through the spending in the bill, you look at the emergency services grants. This is going to increase the funding in the emergency services grants by 5 times almost. It's going to go from about 7 million to 27 million. This is a massive infusion, massive. And in the out years, it's going to increase to 35 million, 7 times, all in one shot. And so, when we hear things like, there's this fiscal cliff, there's no cliff. This is the opposite of a cliff. This is a complete saturation in, frankly, ways that I just think adding this much money to the pot is not particularly responsible, because there is a very good chance that these programs can't even absorb that kind of money and use it. I know that we all are very aware of the workforce shortage in this state, but I honestly don't know how these organizations are even going to be able to use that much money that quickly, because it is a huge infusion, and there are not the workers to do it. In the Homelessness Youth Act, where we are increasing that money by 3 times and 4 times. Again, a huge infusion. Even the transitional housing, we're more than doubling that program. And so when we're told that the funding goes down to $100,000, well, that's not now. The base funding right now is over $5 million. The base funding is over $5 million. So when you hear things like $100,000, that's just not accurate. That's not what we're working with today. It's a little tricky to find. But nonpartisan staff put together some numbers for us. And it's tricky to find because spending on homelessness falls under several different jurisdictions, lots of different pots where this money comes from. So I don't know that this is a complete list, but this is just current base funding for homelessness. And the current base funding for homelessness is $300 million in fiscal year 24. And it's about 300 for 24 and 25. It goes up a little bit in 25. So we're a little over 600 million for the biennium, which works out to $75,000 per homeless person. And I'm not sure where we get the number. I've looked, and I certainly am not saying it's not true, but I don't know where we get the number that family homelessness has increased by 200%. Because when you look at the point-in-time counts, it doesn't appear to reflect that. But what is reflected in the point-in-time counts is that these numbers are pretty consistent. And these numbers have been consistent for a long time, regardless of how much money we've put in. The number of homeless people has not changed, of people experiencing homeless has not changed. And it stays just under about 8,000 people. And that's where we are now, which is where I get this number that it's about $75,000 per person that we're putting in, that we're currently spending in the base funding on homelessness. And again, my frustration is that these programs, while funding sort of emergency situations, they're mostly not funding long-term solutions. And in fact, I'm someone who listens to a lot of podcasts, and most of them are not things that affirm my own beliefs. I try to listen to things that challenge me and make me think a little bit differently, because I think that is helpful. And but I was listening to something on homelessness and the problems that we have in the system, and the problems that we have. This particular thing that I was listening to was talking about the problem that we have in funding this homeless industrial complex. We're doing a lot of funding to support homelessness as it currently exists. And we're not funding here to change anything. None of this funding goes to change things. There's actually one thing in here that is new and a little bit different, and it's a $2 million grant for the chosen family grants. That's the only thing that's a little bit different in this. And that's concerning to me. This is over, how much money is this? Over $300 million new spending? 353, almost $354 million in new spending, but there's no changes. We're not trying to do anything differently. And frankly, the one thing we're doing differently, and I know, Representative Keeler and I have had a lot of conversations about this, is actually something I'm concerned about, and it's these chosen family grants. While in theory I love it, I suspect a lot of us have situations where we know, either within our own families or families we know, who have taken in what we call them stray kids in my house, right? And my family took in a lot of stray kids, and in fact, I'm still very close to some of them this day. I think of Ted particularly, who lived with us when I was in high school, and I mean, he's my brother. I think of him as my brother. He is my brother. He comes to all my kids' events, and I go to his, and I mean, they are chosen family. Ted is my chosen family. So while I understand the intent, I'm really concerned about inserting the government in the middle of those relationships. We've seen throughout the centuries, if we want to look at history, things tend to go badly when we insert government into them, particularly philanthropy and charity, and frankly, just serving our fellow man tends to go badly and decrease when we insert government into the middle of those relationships. I think it's a problem. So once again, we're spending $354 million today, but we're not changing anything. We're propping up an existing system that's not working for the most part. Again, that point-in-time count stays consistent. It's just under 8,000 and has been for years. And so while we move people in and out of homelessness, we're not solving the problem. And I've been so frustrated this year. I'll be honest, for the last 4 years, we've passed a lot of things out of this chamber. And I've said this to a lot of folks lately. I'm sure people are getting sick of hearing me on this. But for the last 4 years, we've been passing bills out of this chamber that were very ideologically driven. And I get that. That's what we do here. But I kind of assumed that when these bills could actually become law, that we would try to do something differently. That it wouldn't just be ideological, but that we would try hard to work together and fix problems. But instead, I feel like we're seeing, and again, I do not want the bill author to think that this is directed at her, because I know her intentions, and I know they are good. But this bill feels like a long line of bills where we're putting in money, but we're not actually changing anything. And it feels kind of like a lazy way to legislate to me. I mean, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, we put a lot of money into these stabilization grants that aren't stabilizing anything. And today, we're putting a lot of money into homelessness programs that haven't reduced homelessness. It's frustrating. $350 million. And that puts our total spending for the biennium so far, what we've passed out of this House chamber, this will bring us up to about $2.5 billion in spending. $2.5 billion in spending out of this chamber. And I can't think of anything that's really changed anything. I can't think of any of the money that we've passed that's really changed anything, that's actually solving a problem. We're putting more money into systems that are not working. Folks, we need to get creative. And again, there are ways to do this. I would hold up Ramsey County in the city of St. Paul. They have done a phenomenal job. They are solving problems. And they're doing things differently. They're doing things differently. And it's what we should be focusing on. But instead, we're spending a lot of money, again, without making any changes. I don't know where we go. It's getting, it's really disheartening. It's really disheartening. Again, $2.5 billion, and we haven't really changed a thing. But that's what we're going to do. It feels, like I said, it feels like a lazy way to legislate, to prop up systems and continue to put money in and not do anything differently. So while I see homelessness as a significant issue in our state, frankly, it's not one that's gotten worse, but it's just not gotten better. And yet, we're not going to do anything differently to change that. So I'm voting no on this today. And I hope we see some different bills come through. I've submitted legislation. I've dropped legislation in the hopper to change some things with homelessness. We'll see. We'll see if that gets a hearing. I doubt that it does. But we got to do things differently, folks, because our state can't afford to just continue to feed systems that don't work. We have to actually change systems if we want to change outcomes. So I'll be voting no today.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Billions of dollars of surplus. 10, 12 years ago, and some of us are still here, we had billions of dollars of deficit. We worked really hard for solutions and really hard when we did our bills. We've got billions of dollars of surplus. So it's easy. We throw money at it. But I'm not here because I want the easy. I'm here to find solutions and to work hard to get those solutions and solve. Because we throw billions out there the easy way, we don't solve a thing. We're here to solve, not to feel good because we have all this money we can throw at something. We need to roll up our sleeves, do the extra work, solve and improve. So, yeah, there are some things that I look back fondly in those tough times because both sides of the aisle came together, worked to find solutions, and did our fiduciary responsibilities to the state in a prudent way, and we made things better. Now, it's tougher on us because the easy way is just throw money at it. I wish we would try harder on this bill.
The member from Clay, the author of the bill, Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, this lazy member sent out a bunch of letters of support across this entire state. And if you look in this packet, we have Dr. Foldis actually did an entire study on this. And since I knew that we were going to be worried about money, and I know that we worried about taxpayers and their dollars, I'm excited that this was brought up. Because what happens, first I want to acknowledge the fact that absolutely our shelters can use this money. And the change that we are trying to make is an historic investment in preventing homelessness. We don't need to recreate wheels here. We've heard in testimony over and over and over that these things are working. They just need more support. So that is the change that we're doing here. I want to be very clear, and I'll read this to you, parts of it. So Dr. Foldis did a study with youth in Minnesota, 1,451 of them. What happens when you're homeless and you don't have a place to go? You end up in the emergency room. We have individuals that we know of stories on both sides of the aisle that you have all shared with me, knowing that we have people in your communities that call the police because sleeping in jail is at least a dry space to be. There's a cost to that. They show up in your emergency rooms. There's cost to that. They show up in other spaces. So if you read this and you understand how this works, it says total taxpayer costs for supporting this cohort for 1 year was nearly $30 million, or more than $20,000 per person. The estimated lifetime burden to taxpayers for supporting this cohort is over $447 million, or nearly $300,000 per person. The cost for 1 year for this cohort on taxpayers was $22.1 million. Mathematically, if we have just 6.1% of our youth to be sustainable on their own by the age of 20, that offsets this cost. So if it's really about the money, this is smart. This is not lazy legislation. This is financially responsible investing in programs across this state that are meaningful and make a difference. Representative New Brindley and I have both talked about our concerns with close-knit. I'll admit to that. That is why in this bill, it is a 1-year pilot project that comes back with data to tell us how that worked. That is not ongoing funding. Because what we know is that that program is designed to support a population age 18 to 24, where, again, many of the stories on the other side of the aisle that this conversation allowed us to have showed that you all went through your bouts of homelessness during that age range. So we heard you. We're talking. Is this perfect? No. That's why it's the Pathway Home Act. That's why we have chairs standing up making commitments that bills that are coming out of their committees will address this. That's why we're open to these ongoing conversations about how we do this moving forward. So I will end. This does solve and improve what we're trying to do here and remind us that shelter saves lives. I encourage a green vote, members. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 73 ayes and 57 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 6. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 6, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to consumer protection, protecting price gouging during an abnormal market disruption, the second engrossment.
The member from Anoka, the author of the bill, Representative Stephenson, to explain your bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think we can be proud that most Minnesotans come together during a crisis. Could be as simple as getting a neighbor's car out of a snowbank, or could be when a tornado destroys a community or a flood or a fire leaves someone without a home. We help. We're generally good neighbors to one another, which is why I think most Minnesotans are rightly disgusted at the thought of someone making a windfall profit off of another person's tragedy. I think most people think it's wrong to squeeze extra money out of someone right at a time that they are most vulnerable. But right now, Minnesota's laws are not consistent with our values. Unlike almost every other state in the country, Minnesota does not have a law against price gouging during an emergency. And so our citizens are vulnerable to exploitation and have no recourse when it occurs. This bill changes that. It would make it illegal to price gouge during a disaster declared by the governor. It would fine people who do price gouge and allow for restitution for the victims. It also establishes clear expectations for what is permissible and impermissible pricing behavior during an emergency. Businesses will not be left wondering what they can and can't do. Some people watching this debate might be a little surprised to learn that Minnesota doesn't have a law against price gouging during an emergency. In particular, I'm sure that some are thinking back to the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic when the price of toilet paper and other essentials soared. In fact, this is an example of how Governor Walz used his executive authority under Chapter 12 to respond to the pandemic. Executive Order 2010 prohibited selling essential goods and services for unconscionably excessive prices. After implementation of Executive Order 2010, the Attorney General's office entered into 100 informal resolutions and 6 court-approved settlements stopping price gouging and recovering restitution. I'm glad that the Governor and the Attorney General were able to use their authority to protect Minnesotans, but I also take seriously the criticism that we here at the legislature should be doing the policymaking. So we've been undergoing a process here to take a hard look at what happened with Executive Order 2010. We talked to a lot of other committee members and a lot of stakeholders about what worked well and what could have been better. And in particular, we had long and extensive conversations with the Retailers Association about how we could put a price gouging bill into law that both protects Minnesota consumers and works for businesses. And I'm pleased to tell you that the retailers support the bill that's before you today. And it's also worth noting that most retailers, and in fact, most businesses in Minnesota would never do this. Most businesses in Minnesota are good citizens and good valued members of our community. But the fact that few people in Minnesota would price gouge doesn't mean that there shouldn't be accountability for those that do. This bill is about ensuring that accountability. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Backer moves to amend House Line Number 6, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A5.
The member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would request a roll call vote, please.
Representative Backer requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands or so, there will be a roll call. Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would agree with the author. First of all, most Minnesotans, us business owners, are there to serve our customers. Though one of the challenges that we do not have any control over, all of us business owners could say, is that nasty little word that starts with an I, inflation. We have no control over that. When COVID hit as a business owner, there was prices that just went crazy, okay? I have a couple articles here. In 2021, lumber went up 37%, and that was because of supply and demand. There was less people working, so there was less product, but the demand was still there. We as business owners have no control over that. Another thing that I have here is an article that flour to make bread so we can eat, flour went up 24.9%, members. Then rent during 2021 from the Washington Post, in places like Austin, New York, and Miami went up 30 to 40%. Us business owners who own property, rent, sell, lease, own, would not control out of those factors. And then the prices of eggs rose 70% from this article here from Business in 2021. So my amendment talks about, though, inflation caused by state and federal government. So how would that affect? Well, obviously during COVID, we had a monetary supply by the federal government that put tremendous amount of money into the economy. So guess what happens if you're the owner of an online ATV business, okay? A lot of people had kids at home, and a lot of people, mom and dad, want to get a reason for the kids to get out, and there was a huge demand, low supply. We didn't control that, and there was prices that went up 20, 30, 40% because of the demand and the lack of supply. How else could the state and federal government affect pricing? Well, we saw that with baby formula last year. There was a factory shut down, I believe that was in Michigan, maybe Ohio, but one of those states, that there was a low demand on baby formula. For moms and dads that have infant, that's something that's a priority. But still, when there's no supply and high demand, you're going to see price increases. Not gouging, it's just how it works when there's low supply. And then finally, in the state of Minnesota, we had an energy bill, our side likes to call it the blackout bill, that was signed into law that is going to increase, stakeholders have talked about increasing energy prices significantly. Well, when energy prices increase, people who manufacture, we manufacture a product in Browns Valley, and other business owners do too, we don't control electricity prices. So my amendment just says a price increase due to inflation caused by state and federal government actions. Because we as small business owners don't control what state and federal government does. So it just makes sense if it's something that deals with state or federal government, that us small business owners should not be affected by those price increases. And then we have to worry about government coming and saying, oh, you increase prices. So that is a concern, and that's why I added that amendment. Thank you, members.
Discussion on the Backer Amendment. Representative Stephenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would ask for a no vote on this amendment. The bill already has protections that make clear that an excessive price doesn't include prices that are raised due to an increase in the cost of manufacturing, obtaining, replacing, providing, or selling a good or service, and that's not contingent upon who causes the price to go up. So I think that the way the bill deals with this problem is better than the way the amendment would deal with the problem, so I'd ask for a no vote.
Further discussion on the Backer Amendment. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 61 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
NISCA moves to amend House File Number 6, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A7.
I recognize the member from Anoka, the author of the amendment, Representative Niska, to explain the A7 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And Representative Stephenson, I appreciate a lot of where you're coming from on this bill. I appreciate the recognition that we as the legislature should be making the policy making, shouldn't be left to the governor in an emergency. And that the current emergency power statute is way too broad and needs to be reformed. I wish we would deal with that more comprehensively than trying to do that on an issue-by-issue basis. But I appreciate the recognition, finally, by this body that what the governor did by taking over lawmaking power in the emergency overstepped, and we as the legislature should reassert ourselves. I do also appreciate the fact that in extraordinary times, some potential bad actors might take advantage of that situation, but I don't think that this bill, as currently drafted, strikes the right balance. I think what it fails to really recognize is that in those extraordinary times, in the market disruptions we're talking about, when we're looking at essential goods and services, an even worse thing than too high prices for those essential goods and services are empty shelves for those essential goods and services. And that is something that all of us experienced way too often in the pandemic. And the fact of the matter is, a fact that I don't think that this bill as currently drafted appropriately recognizes, is that during those periods of time, we all as consumers depend on extraordinary action by, frankly, heroic people, heroic businesses, the manufacturers, the people who work for the manufacturers, the wholesalers and the retailers, and all of the people that have to take extraordinary action to get all of the essential goods and services to the market. And as an attorney who sometimes advises people about how they should behave under certain legal regimes, the bill as currently drafted is going to send the message to all of those people, to all of those businesses, and to the people advising those businesses that in that time of extraordinary market disruption, maybe what they should do if they want to avoid legal liability is just to pull back and not provide those goods and services. And so the purpose of the A7 amendment, and I hope you'll accept this as a friendly amendment, is to add just a little bit more comfort to those folks that if the reason that the prices are going up, and if they can show the reason that those prices are going up is because they're trying to get goods and services to the market and prevent further market disruption, that would be a protection for them under the bill, just to give a little bit more protection to those good businesses. Like you said, Representative Stephenson, most would never price gouge. Most of them, I think, are trying to do the right thing. And this is to help those good businesses to make sure that they can feel safe, that what they're doing, the extraordinary work that they're doing to get goods and services to the market is going to be recognized and protected and not investigated and punished. So I urge members to support the A7 amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A7 amendment. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Stephenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I add a no vote on this amendment. As I mentioned in the last amendment, I think that we already have a number of good controls in the bill to establish what price gouging is and what it isn't. I don't think that this amendment is superior to what's already in the bill. I think what this amendment allows for is price rationing, a situation where if you're wealthy, you have access to goods and services, and if you're poor, you're out of luck. And I don't think that that's the Minnesota we want. I also just want to take a moment and say that I disagree strongly with the idea that this bill as a whole is going to cause businesses to not operate in Minnesota during an emergency or not come to market. Or, there's the suggestion that perhaps a lawyer might give someone advice to not come to Minnesota because of this bill. I think that's demonstrably not true. 36 other states have price gouging protections, including states like Florida and Texas, and we don't see people not going to Florida and Texas during emergencies to provide goods and services. In fact, some of those states have tougher bills than this one and do just fine. Not to make myself look bad in front of my DFL colleagues over here, but Texas, for instance, allows much higher civil penalties than Minnesota, up to $250,000 a day. That's 10 times more. And now I've lost a lot of street cred with my caucus mates here, but that's just the price you pay for good policy, I guess. Vote no.
Any further discussion to the A7 amendment? I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska, the author of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm disappointed, Representative Stephenson. I didn't ask for roll call before because I was hoping that this was something that was reasonable and you'd take it. But, Mr. Speaker, I do request a roll call.
Representative Niska requests a roll call vote. Seeing more than 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote. Is there any further discussion from you, Representative Niska?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and yes, I would encourage members to vote for the amendment. Again, we don't want to threaten, we don't want to punish, we don't want to deter all of those good businesses that are doing the work that is necessary to try to get goods and services to market. The fact of the matter is, when there was an emergency executive order in place, there were a lot of good businesses that did get their reputation smeared, that did get investigations brought against them that turned out not to be meritorious. What Representative Stephenson calls price rationing is actually the law of supply and demand that is necessary in any market in order to get things to market. When prices go up, that is how more things get brought to the marketplace. And so the bill as it's currently written does not strike the right balance. If we're going to go down this road, if we are going to, like I said, assert our authority as a legislature in this area, which I think is a good thing for us to do, to say we as the legislature get to write policy, not the governor and the attorney general in an emergency. But if we're going to go down this road, this is an important protection, an important amendment to add to it to make sure that good businesses, the Main Street businesses that we recognize that their cashiers and their store staff did extraordinary work. Those businesses themselves did extraordinary work in order to bring the essential goods and services to market. Again, we're talking about essential goods and services. A vote no is for empty shelves. A vote yes is to make sure that those shelves do get stocked, that we're making sure that the businesses that do stock the shelves are protected. So please vote yes on the A7 amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A7 amendment. I recognize the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Niska, for bringing this amendment. This is a good amendment, and I hope that we all can agree on this and vote green today. From a business perspective, obviously in economics, we have supply, we have demand, and in something like Representative Stephenson had brought up the toilet paper shortage, so I'm just going to use that as an example because he brought that up. In a manufacturing facility, we can only produce things at a certain rate. So let's just take, this is different, but if you're baking a pizza, it's going to take 15 minutes to bake that, and you can move 4 pizzas through your oven in 1 hour. So I think we can all visually see that. So in this case, when something that was fundamentally necessary to have, like toilet paper, we could not create it or make it fast enough to replenish the supply. Now, I want to give you another example. I have a friend that works at a daycare. They would have to shut down their doors or their business if they did not have the toilet paper for the daycare because that would not be up to code. So this is a business example that as a business, they may have needed to pay more for the toilet paper to get the toilet paper to stay open and to be productive. So this really is just a business 101, and I think we all can agree that we should allow the market to work, and in this case, specifically, when we have essential items that are needed, when government is getting in the way and saying that they know better, what could potentially happen is unintended consequences. There could be withdrawal. People are afraid to sell a product that is needed. And so I do ask you to vote and support Representative Niska's amendment.
Any further discussion to the A7 amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the A7 amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 6.
Third reading. Member discussion to House File 6. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I was impressed today by Representative Stephenson. He was presenting his bill, HF 100, in public safety. And as I said there, Representative, you have a disposition and a way of approaching this process that seems very collaborative and open to discussion, even as you have a clear vision of what it is that you want to accomplish. And I very much appreciate that.
as we look at what this bill attempts to do, what the stated and implied intention of it is, I think it's well motivated. What I see this as trying to prevent is people who are in need because of what we're calling in the language an abnormal market disruption. It's fancy legislative language for a crisis, a disaster, an emergency. Circumstances where people are contending with uncertainty and fear. And in those circumstances, what this bill imagines or forecasts is a scenario where an essential good or service, food, fuel, healthcare supplies, whatever the case may be, is offered to them at a price that, again, referencing the language in the bill, is unconscionably excessive, which is an interesting subjective judgment, unconscionably excessive. And what we're trying to prevent is someone having to endure, having to bear that cost. So, random example, paying $200 for a gallon of water. We don't think that should ever happen. Okay? Well, it won't. It won't happen under this bill. But what also won't happen is that gallon of water won't be available to purchase at any price because it won't be brought to market. Because what price does, the function that it serves, is to communicate to both producers and consumers how they ought to act, how they ought to engage with one another, how they ought to engage with products and services. In that hypothetical situation where somebody's charging $200 for a gallon of water, which, I don't know that that's ever happened, but let's say it does. The reason they're doing so is not because they're unconscionable, it's not because they're a monster, it's not because they're obscene or excessive. They're doing so because that's the price that the product commands. And you know what commands that price? Why? Because somebody's willing to pay it. If they weren't willing to pay it, then the price would have to be lowered. That's how price works. And so what we're actually doing here with this bill, and it was referenced by Representative Niska in his presentation of his amendment, what we're actually doing is we're preventing the market from working the way that it naturally functions. And I understand, Representative Stephenson, you cited other states where similar or even potentially more restrictive legislation has been enacted and offered the claim that everything's fine there, they still get products and services in the event that there's an abnormal market disruption, a crisis, an emergency. Well, we don't know what they're not getting. That's one of the problems with interfering in the economic process, interfering in price, placing noise in the signal of what price communicates, is that you don't know what you don't know. You can't see what you can't see. You don't know how much more might have been made available if price was able to function properly. But I think, more fundamentally than that, well, before I go there, let me just say this. I think what we've witnessed here tonight on the House floor in discussion of this bill and the proposed amendments demonstrates the lack of functionality of this legislation. So in answer to both of the proposed amendments tonight, Representative Stephenson, the author, has stated that this bill already meets the goals intended by those amendments. Well, Harry Niska, in my judgment, is a pretty smart guy. All of our members, relatively smart people. The fact that we looked at this and didn't see what you see, which is an objective met by the language that's already there, stands as testament to the notion that this is a confusing piece of legislation. I mean, you look at the exceptions that are listed here. None of the following is considered an unconscionably excessive price. 1, a price that is substantially related to an increase in the cost of manufacturing, obtaining, replacing, providing, or selling a good or service. Fantastic, wonderful, reasonable. But how do I know that that's true or not? How do I assess that? A more interesting question than how do I assess that is who assesses that? Because this bill gives inordinate power to 2 people, and 2 people only, 2 individuals. It gives supreme power, more power, to the governor of the state of Minnesota, who already, we've had demonstrated to us in recent years, has the capacity to unilaterally cancel democracy, tell us that we all get to live in our homes, we don't get to open our businesses, we can't send our kids to school. He just gets to decide that, one guy. And we accepted it. We went along with it. Now we're saying that on top of that, while he's got us in his peacetime emergency, he can also decide that we can't buy and sell according to our own judgment. We can't set our own prices for our own products. We're going to give him that power. We're also going to empower another member of the executive branch, the Attorney General. And he's the answer to my previous question. Who gets to decide whether or not a price is substantially related to an increase in the cost of manufacturing, obtaining, replacing, providing, or selling a good or service? Well, the AG does. He gets to decide by virtue of whether or not he comes after you, whether or not he pursues an action, whether or not he pursues $1,000 per transaction up to $25,000 per day. I had to double check that to make sure it was right. Per day, $25,000 per day. Wow. So, I'll end here, which is the moral premise of all of this. And I know this is definitely an idea that is not shared broadly, certainly not across party lines, but I hold it to be nonetheless true and accurate. You don't have the moral right to tell somebody what price their product or service can command in the market. You don't have that right. And the reason why you don't have that right is because you don't own that person. They don't belong to you. Their time doesn't belong to you. Their labor doesn't belong to you. The fruit of their labor doesn't belong to you. You don't get to command the terms on which they transact their time, their labor, their effort, their mind, their selves, their person. That's up to them. It's not up to you. So on top of a piece of legislation that doesn't work, doesn't function, can't be understood by smart people in this room, not even sure whether or not an amendment affects a particular end or not, can't tell by looking at plain language what it actually accomplishes, what it actually achieves. This is going to create, not only is it going to create confusion, not only is it going to create more fear and uncertainty during times where people are already operating under fear and uncertainty. We're going to pile more on top of it. The cherry on top of all of that is that it's fundamentally immoral to tell somebody that they cannot offer, not force. Nobody's saying you have to give me $200 for this gallon of water, but to offer. Hey, I drove this up here from Texas. I drove this here from California. It cost me a lot to get it here, but because I did that, it's here and it's available to you for the low, low price of whatever. You're telling somebody that they can't do that, and that is not a right that you have. Not as an individual, and not collectively. There isn't a number of people, there isn't an election certificate There isn't a moral right that exists that gives you the ability, rightfully and morally, to tell somebody what price they can offer for the fruit of their labor. Please vote no.
Further discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Frankly, I wish we had a better section on ag. Even without this bill, there have been actions against poultry farmers because the price of eggs skyrocketed. Well, if you knew it was because of a disease was killing millions and millions of poultry. And there were suddenly shortages. Now, I suppose we could say you can't raise the price, but if we artificially had it low, someone would come in and ship it off to another state where they'd make big bucks. You'd add another middleman or middle person. And frankly, the intent of the bill is great. But if we already have problems where attorney generals go after farmers because of a spot issue out of their control, I think we should have looked better and harder on this bill. Try hard and try better next time. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Anoka, the author of the bill, Representative Stephenson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for the discussion today. I think this is a good bill to solve a problem that we potentially have when we get into an emergency, which is, are we going to allow a very small group of people to enrich themselves off the misery of others? We should not do that. It's not right. This bill allows us to have tools to prevent that from happening and to get recourse for victims when it does. It's pretty straightforward in that respect, so I'll ask for a green vote.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 6. The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 ayes and 59 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 111. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 111, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to public safety.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Moller, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill is a combination of two items that we heard last year. Last year on the floor, we amended our public safety omnibus bill in light of a Minnesota Supreme Court case that came out in the spring called the McReynolds case. In that case, a man used his cell phone to secretly record a woman naked in her bed without her consent. He was prosecuted, convicted of interference with privacy. Unfortunately, the Minnesota Supreme Court reversed that conviction based on the plain language of the statute, that a person is guilty if they use a device for recording, quote, through the window or any other aperture of a house or place of dwelling of another, close quote. The court held that our statute, that language that I just quoted, is not violated when the recording occurs in the same room with a cell phone camera. This case establishes the need to modernize our statutes to reflect how modern technology is being used to victimize people. I suspect that when this law was written, I think it was written back in the 90s, nobody envisioned that we would have devices like cell phones that could make a recording. And if you remember back to the old cameras that people used to use, you know, the giant cameras. So I think at the time, nobody would understand that this would be the technology to be used to record people. The Supreme Court in McReynolds even acknowledged that its decision created an absurd result, and one that could result in stalkers gaining access to their victims' homes to record them. But the court said it was bound by the language of the statute and even recommended how the legislature could fix this problem. And the bill does just that. It prohibits these types of secret recordings in places and situations where victims would have a reasonable expectation of privacy. You have a letter of support from the Minneapolis City Attorney's Office, and that letter further describes the Minnesota Supreme Court McReynolds case. Members, the second thing that this bill does is also from last year, and it changes the statute of limitations in these cases. Those of you who were here before might remember that this was a Representative Miller bill that was also included in our omnibus bill, and it was based on an issue brought to him by constituents. One of his constituents, Madeline, testified in committee this year as well about what happened to her and other women victims, and I just wanted to read her testimony. I have permission from her to read this to you. Madeline says, unbeknownst to me, my personal story of victimization and exploitation occurred on April 22nd, 2018. On that date, nearly 5 years ago, I accepted an offer from a childhood friend to tour his pig farm in Olivia, Minnesota. I viewed this as a novelty experience. I was told I would have to shower because of biohazard requirements. Hog barns are biohazard controlled, meaning by law, one must shower in and shower out. I did as told and continued with the tour, never thinking about this again until May 3rd, 2021. That was the day that my sense of security was ripped away from me and the definition of betrayal took on new meaning. On this day, an article published by the West Central Tribune was sent to me. The link was titled, Olivia Man Alleged to Have Filmed Women in the Shower at His Hog Barn. I read the article multiple times just to make sure I was understanding it correctly. 23 videos and 104 still images were surreptitiously taken of naked women showering at his farm without their knowledge and consent between October 30th, 2016 and December 12th, 2019. I felt physically ill and emotionally traumatized because I knew at that moment I was a victim of a sexually motivated crime. I had no idea of the emotional roller coaster path that lay before me, nor did I understand the gravity and impact it would have on my mental health. I would become known as victim number 11 out of 17 female victims to the Renville County Sheriff's Office. After connecting with the lead investigator in the case and confirming my identity in one of the videos, I learned the predator used the same method of operation in committing every one of his crimes. He waited until each of his victims were showering off, wherein he simultaneously snuck out, climbed up a ladder, watched and filmed me and 16 other women naked through an egress-style window. What further compounded this traumatization was what I learned next. My case would not be included in the charges brought against the perpetrator under this statute because the 3-year statute of limitations for interference with privacy had expired just 8 calendar days before discovering I was the victim in his predatory scheme. Only 6 out of the 17 victims in this case were protected and considered chargeable offenses, while 11 women have been left to deal with the ongoing consequences of this predator's actions and without our day in court, all due to the inadequate statute of limitations for interference with privacy. And Madeline goes on to talk about the need to pass this bill, and that's because the statute of limitations victims don't know that this has even happened to them, and by the time they find out, the statute of limitations has expired. So this bill seeks to fix that and provide justice to victims in these situations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Moller moves to amend House Law Number 111 as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Ramsey, Representative Moller, to explain the A1 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment puts the bill in alignment with an amendment that was made in the other body. It's good for victims in that it allows, in any of those cases where that time period is still open, they'll also have the benefit of this new statute of limitations. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion to the A1 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the A1 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended.
Third reading, House Law Number 111 as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to House File 111. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a really important bill, and I want to just point out to the public that's watching, this is how we should do every single bill. This is real. It came from some court cases, and Representative Moller and I have worked for years on doing this sort of work. And I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for continuing to reach out to me, even though I'm not in public safety anymore. But the work is really, really important, and I see that there are other Republican authors on this as well. Members, this is a real problem. I would think every person in this room, every son and daughter that you have, every aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, grandma, has an expectation in their own home for a sense of privacy. And if somebody sets up a recording device and records you in the privacy of your own home, that should be unlawful. Simply put, you should have privacy in the privacy of your own home. And then the second half is Representative Miller's bill. And of course, he's not here with us this time as he chose not to run again. But that is also incredibly important because one also would think that if you have been asked to go through that, which is very common in the ag world, that you would not be recorded doing that, making sure that the animals are kept safe. So that's also part two, incredibly important. So members, this is a real bill. This is really important. This is a bipartisan work. I could not thank Representative Moller more. Thank you so much for including us and checking in with me and looking at the bill together. I appreciate that. I appreciate the work that we've done throughout the years. And members, this is how we should do everything. This is how legislation should be done. So I just want to applaud you and thank you, and please vote yes on this bill. Thank you, members and Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that, Representative O'Neill. It's been a real honor to work, especially on these issues with you over the years. And thanks to all of the bipartisan support that we have on this bill. Representative Miller, if he's watching, I did tell him this was coming here today and he wasn't able to join us, but really appreciate him bringing this issue forward on behalf of his constituents. Nonpartisan staff worked to modernize this statute for us and really am thankful for their work. But I especially want to thank Madeline, who is here with us tonight. She is really kind of the spokesperson on behalf of many of the survivors who experienced this. And I will never I will never stop being amazed by the survivors of sexual assault who time and time again come to us, tell us their stories, knowing that if we fix the law in this way, it can't retroactively impact their cases, but yet they keep on coming, telling us where they didn't get justice so that we can make sure there's justice for the next person. And I really look forward to hopefully seeing a unanimous vote tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 111. Representative Herr, please vote. clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 800. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 800, number 4 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government ratifying certain labor agreements.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Lillie, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill ratifies 2 collective bargaining agreements for state employees in the executive branch. These contracts are actually for fiscal years 22 and 23. The other 18 contracts have already been ratified, so we'd be wrapping up, going backwards and picking up these last 2 contracts. The others were ratified in 2021 and 22. These 2 contracts included in this bill were implemented after they had been sent to the Subcommittee on Employee Relations, so they're currently in effect. There's basically the 2 contracts. The one is for the Minnesota State College faculty, which is about 3,900 folks that work at our community colleges all over the state of Minnesota. And the other part is government engineers, and there's about 1,100 of those folks, and most of them work at MnDOT. So if you're thinking of your roads being plowed here in the last few weeks, that's this team that's doing that. There's also ratified several memorandums of understanding. And so what those are is those are additional negotiated agreements with the labor groups of all over the state, and they're varied. And what they do is they're pretty similar to the ones that have been passed in last session. And quite honestly, most of them are to handle the problem that we've had with retention and keeping folks working around the state, and to continue to do those things. So we've had a lot of positions. I mean, it's no secret with government workers filling positions. I think there was about 300 or 400 that we were down in the health department, and so there's trying to do some work with that. There's money for lottery workers to give them incentives in that area, and there's also language that allows folks to take care of their kids during quarantined. We're kind of going back through COVID, but I think basically it's it's a kind of a pickup of the same language that was in the other bills, and so I think there's some good understanding. We've had I think in committee we had good support from. Thank you, Representative Nash. Even had some positive comments, so that was fantastic, and appreciate that. Sorry to rat you out, and Representative O'Neill, I know you were just speaking on another issue, but I'm always impressed on how you look at these as well, the contracts, and take them very serious and look at them. And I had some wonderful questions, but happy to stand for questions if there are any. This is important work for the people that help us around the state. Thank you.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading.
3rd reading, House File number 800.
3rd reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Lillie. And I do appreciate, this is another one of these good working relationship things. I just want the public to know, too, that you actually did come to me in my office. We had a long conversation about the contracts, about the MOUs, to make sure I didn't have any concerns. And I was actually missing one piece of information. So as you know, I read everything. And I was missing something. And so when I found it, I actually had a small series of questions about something. And Representative Lillie got a hold of who we need to get a hold of in our nonpartisan research staff. And they went all the way up to MMB and they got the answers, and the answers made sense to me. So I appreciate that. We were doing that just before debate today. So I just want the public to know that we are working behind the scenes, we are working collaboratively, we are asking hard questions. I'm going to support this bill today. These are the last 2 contracts of the whole series of 18, 19 contracts or so that we do with the state employees. And one of these contracts actually is, I believe it's negotiated by Min-State. So that Min-State actually gets to negotiate some of their contracts. So they've been waiting for this contract. There's just a few months left of this contract already. They've been paid for most of it. The one thing that I would say, though, because I always tell you the good and the bad and my concerns. So we did not meet in the SCR. So the Subcommittee on Employee Relations normally would meet and we would review all of these things. And I've been on it for a decade. And we did not do that. And Representative Lillie, I know you had the gavel and now you don't. I believe it's the Senate that has the gavel. But my ask would be that we would go back to the standard of actually meeting and discussing these things and asking those questions, because I certainly would have liked to ask MMB my question about Department of Revenue that we talked about offline and had that answered there in that committee hearing. So I'm going to support the bill. It's a reasonable bill. It is some things that are really important for state agencies to have, which is some flexibility when they're doing hiring and retention. Because for one example, I had said this to some people earlier, but one example is an intensive treatment home for foster care kids, and they're really struggling to have enough staff because that's a 24/7 facility. So there is some flexibility in here for the staff that they have asked for. And that's a really reasonable thing. That's one of the MOUs. Some other things are some bonuses and some financial incentives, but this is a reasonable bill. It's a reasonable contracts and reasonable MOUs. And I do appreciate the fact that we did literally hammer some questions out just minutes before we stood up on the floor. So thank you, Representative Lillie, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion to House File 800. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Well, we can't let Representative Lillie off that easily. After all, he's one of the nicest legislators in this whole body. Wouldn't you all agree? Representative Lillie, I'll have to give you your $1 back. I'm sorry. But anyway, only in government that we can pass a law today, which is the action and funds are already implemented yesterday. So just curious as what you say, Representative Lillie, regarding government law passed today, which is already implemented yesterday.
Representative McDonald, are you asking Representative Lillie if he will yield to a question?
Well, I certainly am. Thank you, Mr.
Representative
Speaker.
Lillie, will you yield? He will yield. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Lillie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative McDonald, it is a little bit of magic. And since it's your wonderful month of March, maybe we can add some additional magic later in the month. But yes, it's going back. They are in effect. But technically, we could, if we do not pass this, it actually could be quite disastrous in all sincerity. Many of the employees that relieved or received some of the benefits of this contract might have to repay some of the bonuses or, on and on and on. So it would actually really be quite a horrible, sad situation. I'm sorry to make light of it earlier, but it actually could be a serious problem. But thank you, Representative. Looking forward to the 17th.
Representative McDonald.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman or Speaker. I wasn't going to say anything further, but since you called my name, Representative Lillie, would you author one of my bills in the future? Because you have a good track record. But thank you. Yeah, we'll see what happens on the 17th of March. Mr. Speaker, thank you, Representative Lillie.
Is there any further discussion to House File 800? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Lillie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. This really is, we're so lucky with our staff that we have for the state of Minnesota, and this is another opportunity to say thank you for the work that they do for us. And I just can't imagine how, we're one of the best run states in the country, and it's because of our staffs. And we're quite lucky. And I'm we make their life interesting as legislators, but they implement what we do here and make us all look good, and we're very lucky to have their work. Appreciate a green vote today.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 800. The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The final bill on the calendar for today is House File 112. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 112, number 5 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to education, delaying review of physical education standards.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not an involved bill. This is pretty straightforward. We have something in education that's called academic standards. We have them in math, we have them in physical education, and the topic of this one is physical education. In 2017, we passed standards in physical education, PE. It was done with a lot of stakeholder input, so we started the process. We created the standards. Now, usually standards are reviewed on a 10-year cycle. At that point, it was decided we should review it after 5 years. All right, so that was put into statute. But what happened in those intervening years is that we had disruptions in our schools, and they were not able to really implement physical education standards, PE standards, out on the playground. They weren't able to do that. So the 5 years was not working because we can't go back and review these standards until they've actually been implemented. And right now, schools all across the state are still implementing the standards. So what we need to do is delay the review of the standards. So again, the process is we create the standards, we implement the standards, we review and revise. We're trying to review and revise at the same time we're implementing, and that's not working for our schools. So what we're doing in this bill is we're acknowledging that all across the state right now, our PE teachers need a break. We don't want them to do unproductive work. So what we would like to do is just delay the review of the standards, just like we delayed the implementation of the standards. So that is what the bill is today. It is time sensitive, because if we don't get this done this week, there will be PE teachers in your schools that are trying to review something that they've just now begun to implement. So we'd like to get it done, get it finished, and then help out our schools.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 112.
Third reading. Discussion on House File 112. I recognize the member for Moller, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair Pryor. I appreciate you talking about the time sensitiveness of this. You know, this is March, what day are we on? March 2nd, and it is common practice that when we bring a bill to the floor that's single subject, it is obviously something that we prioritize. We have seen, even before February forecast, that we have spent quite a lot of money, and that has been the priorities of the majority party. Something that has been a bipartisan priority has been reading, and the drastic and woefully poor scores that we've seen in literacy. And yet the two bills that we have seen out of our education committee is this and universal lunches. It was told to us that universal lunches is the cornerstone, that if kids are able to eat, they're able to learn. Well, if kids aren't able to read, they're also not able to learn. And so I would like to see if Chair Pryor would yield to a question, please.
Representative Pryor will yield to a question. Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just wanted to know, we have several bills that have addressed the science of reading and have specifically talked about how we should have supports in our schools and supports for our teachers so that they can learn the science of reading. And I just want to know if we're going to have be able to bring those up, please.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Long, for what purpose do you rise?
Mason 101, science of reading is not the subject of the debate that we are under right now.
Representative Mueller, please confine your remarks and your question to the bill that is before us, House File 112.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Long. I do want to acknowledge that I understand why you rose to your point of order. I'm also trying to acknowledge that this is about education, and nothing is more important than our children learning to read. And so I think it is imperative for us to be able to have our education chairs say that they will bring forward a bill, single subject, that shows that it is a priority for all of us, so our children are able to learn how to read. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor.
As I said before, it's a simple bill, it's a simple need. We can meet that need today. We can save our schools, our PE teachers right now a lot of headache by doing the right thing tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 112. The clerk will close the roll. There being 103 ayes and 27 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-contranting motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Stephenson Yeager moves that House File number 2084 be recalled from the Committee on Housing, Finance, and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Commerce, Finance, and Policy.
I recognize the member from Washington, Representative Hemmingson Yeager, to explain your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's my motion. I've spoken with both chairs, and they're good with it, so thank you.
Representative Hemmingson Yeager, could you please explain a little bit about what your bill does?
I sure can. This is a bill that looks at the legal fees that are imposed on fines from homeowners associations onto homeowners. We put it in housing because homeowners, but it's actually more appropriate to be heard in commerce.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. Announcements. I recognize the member from Hennepin, the Majority Leader, Representative Long.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m., Monday, March 6th, 2023.
Representative Long moves when the House adjourns today, it adjourns at 3:30 p.m., Monday, March 6th, 2023. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. Representative Long.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn and that members have a good weekend.
Representative Long moves that the House do now adjourn and that members do have a good weekend. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. Monday, March 6, 2023.